Buon pomeriggio a tutti. A nome del comitato organizzatore di Festival Letteratura ringraziamo Gruppo Tea per aver contribuito alla realizzazione di questo evento. A mettere gli accenti al loro posto Marta Bagigalupo e Lorenzo Pirovano.
Buon pomeriggio a tutti.
Ben ritrovati, ben ritrovate.
Vi salutiamo in italiano, ma vi ricordiamo che l'accento sarà in inglese. Diamo il benvenuto a Colum e possiamo dire abbastanza, con una certa sicurezza, che circa fino a mezz'ora fa, Colum stava ancora fischiettando Delilah di Tom Jones, che avete ascoltato, e vi racconterà lui perché.
Perché nella prossima mezz'ora ripercorrerà insieme a noi la storia della sua fede calcistica per lo Stoke City, che ieri ha vinto con l'Huddersfield. Un applauso allo Stoke City, per favore. My Life as a Midfielder, l'accento di Colum McCann, inizia ora.
Hello. Thank you. Anybody here from Stoke? Anybody here know about Stoke? All right. Where are you from? Edinburgh. So you know. All right, great. Were they the only two hands who actually knew about Stoke City? Okay, I have a long story to tell you then. and then I will tell you why. Why? Actually, maybe everybody, by the end of this, when the last grain of sand comes down, together we're going to sing, why, Delilah, right? So let's just practice it now. Why, Delilah? Perfect, okay, great. I'm that sort of person who's the worst person to have at your party because I do sing, but I can't. So, Stoke City. Okay, where does it all begin? Well, for me, this is a story that ties in with my nationality. I'm Irish. It ties in with my father, who passed away 6 years ago. It also ties in with a sense of identity and even the idea of being an underdog. So my father was a football player. He was born in Dublin. At the age of 16, he went to London, and he played for a team called Charlton Athletic. He was a goalkeeper, but he was a second-string goalkeeper. He never got to play in the first team. The first team was dominated by a brilliant goalkeeper, like a Buffon-type character, his name was Sam Bartram. So my father got paid 2 and 6 per week. In modern-day money, that would be the equivalent of 50 euros per week. Not a lot of money to live on, right? And in the morning, he trained as a chef. And in the evenings, he cleaned the boots for all the other players. So suffice it to say, well, he wasn't a very successful football player. He loved the game, but he wasn't successful. Now, he'd grown up in Dublin, and he left school at the age of 12. But the thing was, he was a very, very, very good writer. And so when he left football, well, he had a job as a chef, then he had a job as a clown, and then he went to Egypt with the British Army, go figure, for a year. My mum, who's from Derry in Northern Ireland, and my dad got married in Egypt. But anyway, they came back to England, and my father started to write about football, right? And he reported for the BBC, and he became a journalist. Then he came back to Dublin and started his family. And I was the first one to be born in Ireland. And we had a relatively sort of safe, middle-class upbringing. You know, my father was working for the newspaper, the Irish Press. And, I played football. I played as a midfielder. My brother was a goalkeeper, a lot taller than me. And he actually got trials for Manchester United and all of that. But my father would bring us across from Dublin on the boat, on the cattle boat, in fact, from Dublin across to Liverpool, and then we get on the train towards Manchester and then on to Stoke-on-Trent, because we wanted to see one particular goalkeeper, or he wanted to see one particular goalkeeper. Does anybody know who that goalkeeper would have been? Gordon Banks, exactly. Gordon Banks and Peter Shilton, they both played for Leicester and Stoke. I could have been a Leicester supporter. Things could have been better for me. But I ended up being a Stoke City supporter. And so I would go to the games and I would travel with my father. Now, I wrote a little piece to try to give you a little bit of the atmosphere about my father. But this is me when I was, I think, 7 or 8 years old with my father. And I'm also wearing a Stoke City jersey, as you will see, red and white stripes. But I want to read you just a little piece about one of the journeys that we did together, and then tell you a little bit more about the stuff. It's called The Journey Home. 7 years old, the boat pulled out from Dunleary. Dublin faded in the distance, a choppy sea, huge and grey. I wore my Stoke City scarf and shirt under my blue anorak. My father guided me down the steps into the hull. Some men were arguing over a bottle, thick Irish accents. They sat under a blanket of cigarette smoke. Others intent at the slot machines. The boat tilted and rolled. We were on our way to London to see my hero, Gordon Banks, play for Stoke against Arsenal. Everything was new to me. Everything. The smoke, the roar, the leaving. I could feel my heart thumping in my striped shirt. I pulled the scarf tight around me. My father had booked a berth. We climbed into bed for the 8-hour crossing. He had taken this boat many times before, towards England. He had been a goalkeeper in the 1950s, for Charlton Athletic, for other teams too. He never talked about it that much. Hey, Dad, did you save a lot of goals? Go to sleep now, son. Did you ever save a penalty? Sleep. Were you as good as Gordon Banks? The boat pitched and rolled. The sound of slot machines filtered through the air. Shouts rang out, fighting and laughter and dreams. I don't know if I slept, I can't recall. But we got off the boat at Holyhead with the rumour of light already in the sky. It was the day of the game. We boarded a train to London. A man in a railway hat blew a whistle and I pitched from seat to seat. Dad, look, he's got a red flag. Maybe he's a Stokey. Be quiet now, son. Don't speak too loud. Why, Dad? Well, some people don't like our accents. Why not? Just because. Quiet now, good lad. Because we're Irish? Bad people had been letting off bombs in England, he said. We had to be careful, or otherwise certain people might think we were there for things other than football. It stumped me, but I stayed silent. I curled up in the seat and I watched the fields whiz by. England wasn't very green. There were lots of big towns and big chimneys, and grey smoke poured across the sky. My mother had packed ham sandwiches for us, and my father had a flask of tea. We sat back and ate breakfast as the train thundered across the country. The world was so entirely new. Dad, do you think Banksy will save a penno? Of course he will. Do you think Terry Conroy will score again? Twice, said my dad. In London, we stopped at a Wimpy. I had my first ever hamburger, 1972. It was strange and thrilling. I washed it down with a club orange. We got on a bus out to Highbury. We moved down back streets past red brick houses. Hush, he said to me again. Hush. We still didn't want anyone to hear our accents. Soon enough, there were rivers of people, songs and chants, and Arsenal also wore red. It was a sea of moving red and white. My father held my hand. He held it tight. "Careful now," he whispered. "Don't stray away from me." "Son," he said. It was all he needed to say. Gordon Banks bounced out on the pitch. "Banksy!" I was sure Banks heard me. I was sure the whole world heard me. This was football, after all. This was the world's greatest game. Gordon Banks threw his gloves and his hat into the corner of the goal, and he turned to take a practice shot. He caught it. Even from a distance, his hands seemed huge. Nothing could get past him. "Banksy!" My father didn't shush me. He didn't tell me to be quiet. He said, "Go ahead, son, and shout." Gordon Banks was English. That didn't matter. He had nothing to do with bombs, and he had nothing to do with dead bodies strewn across my country. He was the world's greatest goalkeeper, and that was all. He had even made that save from Pelé. I could shout as much as I wanted, because I wasn't interested in bombs either. "Banksy!" I wrapped my arms around my father. The whistle blew. We lost 1-0. The world began, and that was football. That was fathers. That was long ago. London was peaceful. It was very, very peaceful. Even when we lost, it was peaceful. And my father took my hand, and we started the long journey home. We were Irish. We were going home. The bus, the train, the boat, the sea, the land. Thank you. So, football can mean a lot to us. A football game is not just a football game, as we know. There's so much on the line. Napoli playing Juventus yesterday. There's so much emotion on the line. You see kids in the stadium crying, and there's something so tremendous about the way it can bring us together, and can also, of course, pull us apart. But I will tell you another story about going to London with my father, also going to a Stoke City game a year after this particular one. And that, so I told you my father left Ireland at a young age, but his father was already in London. So my grandfather, I never met my grandfather, right? I had never met him at all. We went to a game, and before we'd gone to the game, on the ship over, you could buy duty free, you could buy bottles of whiskey and cigarettes. Now, my dad didn't drink whiskey, but he bought a bottle of whiskey, and I thought that was curious. And then I was really confused by the fact that he bought like 200 cigarettes. And but when we got out of the game, and that one was in QPR, I think, my father took my hand, and he said, "Okay, you're on your way to meet your grandfather." So my grandfather was in a nursing home. He was dying. And we went up the stairs. It was on the Pimlico Road in London. We went up the stairs and walked in, and my grandfather was there in the bed, and I stood with my father inside the door, and he said, "Who's that?" And my dad goes, "Sean." And it was odd for me because, you don't hear your dad. Your dad is dad. You don't think of him as his first name sometimes. I was like, "Sean." I said, "Who's that with you?" He said, "That's your grandson, Colum." And you know what my grandfather said? "Another fucking McCann." I kid you not. However, in a very Irish fashion, my dad gave me the whiskey to give to my grandfather. Wouldn't give me the cigarettes to give to him, but would give him the whiskey. And he took the cigarettes, and he lit a cigarette, and he poured some whiskey, and he began to tell me stories. He told me stories about growing up in Ireland, being wanted dead or alive by the Black and Tans, going over to Spain to fight, and all of these great stories from this man in this bed. And it's the one and only time I got to meet my father. And I remember I was still wearing my Stoke City shirt and my Stoke City scarf. And these things bring back so many different memories for me. And it was a profound and wonderful time. Something else happened, though, later that day. When we left the Pimlico Road and we left the nursing home, my father took me to the Hard Rock Cafe in London. Now, this was very cool. This was 1974. I think I was 9. And we went to the Hard Rock Cafe, and the waitress was Irish. And she did something that I will never, ever, ever forget. She sort of, she asked where I was from, said, well, we're from Dublin, and I can't remember where she was from. She was probably very young, but she looked older to me. And then she brought me a free ice cream sundae, and she touched my cheek just like that. And I never forgot it. And every time I go back and arrive in London, I think of that person. I think of the generosity and the kindness and these random moments in our lives that we can touch against, and we never know the power that they're going to have. Like this little moment of kindness that this Irish waitress showed to me comes back to me now, 45 years later, more, and I can still feel it. It makes me think of how important it is, our encounters, even today, tomorrow, yesterday, and all of this for me is wrapped up in my love of this this odd and kind of wonderful soccer team. And I've been a supporter now since I was 4 years old. I've gone to some of the games with people I love, and I was a soccer player myself. I was a midfielder, and I always dreamed of being a Stoke City midfielder. I was never going to be good enough. But there are times now that I still listen to the games. I actually I watch the games, and I listen to them live whenever I can, which is kind of an odd thing when you think about it. I'm living now in New York. I have a completely different sort of life, but I still cling to those things that were formed for me when I was that young. The idea of having an English hero, of being Irish and having an English hero, Gordon Banks, was very, very, very important for me. I only realized its importance, though, years later. And, I used to go to my bedroom and I would play out the games. I had the tennis ball and throw it against the wall, and I'd jump around and catch the ball and pretend that I was Gordon Banks. And I will tell you that I don't even know what year it was. Somebody out there might know what year it was. But Gordon Banks was in a car accident, and he lost sight in one of his eyes. And I remember that day very distinctly, my father coming up the stairs to me, sitting down on my bed and telling me that Gordon Banks had been in a car crash, and I couldn't quite believe it. And he went on, and he still played a couple more games after that. He actually went to the United States and played some games with one eye. He was that brilliant a goalkeeper. I mean, name the great goalkeepers in the world. Zoff, Buffon, Gordon Banks, Peter Shilton. Who else? Yashin. Who else? Oh yeah, thank you. And there's something also about being a goalkeeper. My father used to tell me that you had to be slightly mad to be a goalkeeper. You're there in the rear guard, and you're taking You're taking everything that comes along. But you're also, in a way, the final line of defense, obviously, but you're also captain. Your voice is the one that gets projected all the way up the field. And that's the way I sort of think of my relationship with my father. I still hear his voice behind me, coming along and guiding me in some of the things that I have done. So now, anyway, I'm a writer. I've never talked about this before publicly. I've never talked about my relationship to football or Stoke City, but I talked a little bit with a reporter this morning, and I'm talking about it now. And I don't know what led me to start to talk about this in Mantova, of all places. But it strikes me that some of my life is still unplumbed, and that maybe one day, I will write about it, in a more considered way than this even, because I would like to be able to capture the texture of what it feels like to have a father who's a footballer and to grow up, in this way. Now here he is. That's my dad, as you saw, and that's me, and we're in the school grounds just across from our room. And I want to tell you, I think I still have time. I watched the blue sand disappearing. That another story. So, as I told you, my dad came home from England, settled in Ireland, became a writer and a newspaper editor. Well, he also wrote books. In the end, he wrote 27 books. He wrote books about Irish culture, Irish history, literary figures, the Irish in love, and so on. He also, strangely for an Irishman, I suppose, he wrote about roses. He was a rosarian. We had 1,000 roses in our garden at home. My enduring image is of my father, like drinking a glass of wine, rolling a ball at his foot, walking down the back garden, speaking to his roses. And he used to do it all the time. But here's the thing. He also wrote 7 kids' soccer books. And there were Goals for Glory, We Are the Champions, and so on. They were published in England. They were also published in Norwegian and Swedish for some reason, and Icelandic as well, I remember. But this was the music of my childhood. My father, out in the shed at the side of our house, typing away on his typewriter. Now, he only used 2 fingers. It's called Hunt and Peck. But he was one of the fastest typers that I knew. And so when I was 7, maybe 8, I can't quite remember, he came to me and he said to me, will you read something for me? And I'm like, well, I didn't know what that meant. But of course, you say, if your dad asks you to read something for him, you're going to say yes. So he gave me these, like, several long sheets of paper. And, you know those rolls of paper that you get in newspaper offices that you would feed through a typewriter and then you would cut it off and cut it off? Well, he gave me several long sheets, and it turned out to be the start of his very first children's book called Goals for Glory. And in the book, the main character is called Georgie Good, right? After Georgie, thank you. And he's an itinerant kid living in London whose father's in a caravan, Romany or Gypsy, that's a pejorative term, but and he gets in all these adventures over the course of these books. But I remember being profoundly engaged with this particular book and this text in front of me. And he asked me to read it and tell me did I like it, and I loved it. I'm 8 years old, reading about soccer and reading about all these things that are happening around me. And Georgie was a great hero for me. Now, I became the reader for my dad's books. We had a very strong relationship. I loved him very much, and later he became the reader of my books, which is interesting too. But I will tell you that one of the great moments of my life as a writer and also as a young person, though I wasn't entirely conscious of everything that was happening at the time, was when I was 9 and this book came out. It's called Goals for Glory. And my teacher in school in Dublin, in Foxrock, St. Bridget's School, Foxrock, Mr. Kells, was reading the book aloud to us. He would read it every Friday for 4 Fridays in a row. And he said to us, he would only read us the book if we all behaved ourselves, you know. But it was something that he'd do, at the end of class. And it was fantastic to me. But I remember the very, very last scene in the book was where Georgie Good obviously scored a goal in the cup final, overcoming all adversity, you know. And right in front of me was a classmate by the name of Christopher Howlett, who had a shock of red hair on him, you know. And he jumped up and stood on the desk and started throwing his hands in the air because Georgie Good had scored. And I remember sitting there stunned and very silent thinking, that's weird. Because this boy is celebrating a goal as if it's all entirely real. But in fact, I know that it came from my father's shed because I have heard the music of that clacking day after day after day, and I saw it on sheets of paper. Now I recognize it as the imagined becoming real. And it's profound to me. But at the time, I just thought, isn't that strange? And I think in many ways, it's why I ended up becoming a writer. Because I recognized the strange power that the imagination can have to make something entirely real. And so Christopher Howlett jumping up on the desk in front of me is one of the great memories that I have of school and my father and my engagement with literature. Now, there are many days I still think that I could write something imaginary and have Stoke City win all their games. The fact of the matter is that they don't. Although, as you heard, they won yesterday against Huddersfield. And we're now third in what amounts to the Division 2. But I have maintained my fondness for the team. And I think part of it is because I sort of loved my father so deeply. And I have to tell you that that fondness has passed along to my daughter, of all people. I've 3 kids, 2 boys. They don't really care about football at all. But my daughter, who's now 24, she said, Dad, you know, she's a big Stoke fan. She loves Ryan Shawcross. She does all this stuff. But she said, Dad, you really cursed me. First of all, you know, I'm now a Stoke City supporter of all things, so I'm sort of doomed in many ways. And secondly, she said it to me. She texted me again last week when Ireland lost against Portugal 2-1, and then we also drew against Serbia. She said, Dad, not only am I a Stoke City supporter, but I'm Irish too. So my football life is doomed. But it's interesting for me to think about how all these things get passed along, which brings me to, you know, the fact that we question these things, we experience these things, and we bring them along with us in every moment of our lives. I'm always asking the question why, and I suppose the writer's life is in pursuit of the why. The who, what, why, when, how, and where, in fact. But the why is very, very, very important. And the thing is that the Stoke City song that song is the song that you heard at the very start up here. We'll probably finish off with it again when we're finished here. But it's the Tom Jones singing Why Delilah. And it gives me chills when I get a chance to watch the games or to listen to the games or even to go to some of the games and they sing this song. It's rather rude and naughty the way they've changed the lyrics. But so we won't change the lyrics, but we will sing, I think, as the blue sand goes away, we will sing a little verse of Why Delilah, and then we'll go into it once again. So you're now officially Stoke City supporters. Are you ready for it? Thank you. And please sing Why Delilah? Why Delilah? So he said, oh, thank you. The sand is gone.
Thank you, Colum. Ringraziamo Colum McCann e speriamo che questi 30 minuti di approfondimento sportivo abbiano lasciato il segno nella vostra giornata. Torniamo a mettere l'accento con il prossimo incontro alle 16 con un approfondimento sul colonialismo italiano con Simona Berane e Veronica Fernandez. A dopo. Vi ricordiamo che potete uscire alla vostra destra.